you to see me. So the way that we're going to do this call is that you might notice as people come on, we're going to take you off video just because it makes it easier for you to simply just focus on me while I'm introducing you to the topic that we are talking about today, which is making love to yourself the Tantric way. And my intention with this call is really to, I guess, to create a field by which at the end of this call, all of us will feel that we have permission and that we have basic idea of how to go about starting to discover what it really means to make love to ourselves in our physical bodies, in our sensual sexual bodies. And I want to introduce you on this call to 3 principles of Tantric work that would be very helpful in terms of exploring your relationship with your own sexual body. So again, welcome to all of you. So beautiful to have this opportunity to just freely share and discover together. What I'm also going to be doing on this call is later on I'll be introducing you to a short free video product that I have, which will give you a bit more information and a bit more to work with from what I'm sharing with you today. And then a very low-cost audio, which I've created as a meditation for you to use to go and explore. And then also I'm very excited to introduce on this call a whole video and audio series which Tiffany and I have been creating that bring together some of the basic practices that I have been teaching in workshops across the world on this material, and also some that may not be that familiar to people that have been working with me. So quite a bit to share with you today. And as we begin the call, maybe just to acknowledge that for so many of us, the topic of having a relationship with our own sexual bodies is probably one that is quite awkward. And the reason for that is because we have grown up in a society that is incredibly confused and contracted around sexuality. And so the reason for that, if we look at it in terms of politics and history, has much to do with the fact that if people can control our sexuality, they really can control our lives, right? So it's such a core aspect of who we are as human beings, our sexuality. And for how long now? We could say it would be for 5,000 years, for the last 5,000 years. Humanity has developed a very conflicted and contracted relationship with sexuality that actually has become very polarized, so that we either buy into a model that sees sexuality as something that's very shameful and to be kind of avoided and not really spoken about. So kind of world that most of us grew up in, where sexuality is a taboo topic. Or on the other hand, then what do we do in order to explore? We find pornography magazines. We listen to Hollywood. We use the models that we find around us to develop some kind of idea of how to relate to our sexuality. And in the mix of all of this, what also happens is that we start to believe that we can't really have an honest relationship with our own sexual bodies. That if we really want to be making love in a way that's acceptable in the world, then we basically have to find a suitable sexual partner, because self-loving in our world is just really basically limited to the understanding of masturbation. And where did we learn about masturbation? We learned about it in secret behind closed doors. And for most of us, it's really, masturbation was something that was maybe something that we discovered in our teenage years, and that went with a lot of rush and a lot of hush and not necessarily a very conscious, loving relationship with our bodies. And so you might find it interesting that I am introducing the topic of self-loving in the context of Tantra, which is a discipline that actually is interested in accessing the highest dimensions of our being, and really the realization of who we are in our essence, in our divine essence, in our non-dual state. In other words, who we are beyond our polarized ideas of who we are, what's right and what's wrong, what's good and what's bad, who I am, who I'm not, what kind of a person I am, what kind of a person I'm not. And so there's that movement in Tantra towards the dropping into our transcendent oneness with all of life. But that's not enough for the Tantric world. It's as important in Tantric practice to bring what we realize in the beyond back into our bodies and back into our lives. And so that is why sexuality and working with sexual energy is such a core element of Tantric practice. If we look in the mystery traditions of the world, then Tantric practice isn't just the work of the monks and the nuns or those who devote themselves on some mountaintop to spiritual practice. It's actually meant for those who are in the workplace, those who are engaging with society. Because the idea is to bring what we realize in our inner world also into our everyday lived experience. And that includes into our sexual experience and our intimate lives. So, of course, over the centuries of Tantric practice in various traditions, the masters have discovered pathways through which sexual energy moves that actually activate our connection with a state of oneness or unity consciousness. And that's one of the elements of what I want to introduce you to today, is simple ways of starting to connect to your own divine essence through connecting with your sexual energy. And then I also just want to address this myth which many of us are walking around with, which is that we actually believe that in order to access the full potential of our sexuality, we're going to have to find that, perfect lover that is able to take us on a journey where we can finally drop in and fall in love with ourselves and meet our own bodies with full acceptance and full ecstasy. And I think many of us have probably found that it's possible that we have that experience temporarily, maybe when we fall in love with somebody, but it's not necessarily a lasting experience. And also that if we don't come to a point in our lives where we start to actually be interested in loving ourselves, we become so dependent on somebody else's mood and their state and whether they show up in the right way, that it puts an enormous burden on our relationship lives, actually. And so I believe that it's our self-responsibility to really begin with our relationship with our own bodies, our relationship with ourselves. If we don't learn to make love to ourselves, to have a loving relationship with our own bodies, then how can we expect somebody else to do that for us? There is a new balance that we're being invited to. And I also do believe that we're actually entering a new era in our world where these last 5,000 years of suppression of sexuality, and where we have been to a large degree controlled by, one could say, by religious movements that have been behind political movements that are controlled by economic movements, that system of rigidity that we've grown up in is actually now opening up to a new dimension within which we can live on this planet, which we could call the fourth dimension, or the dimension of love, where love is the power, and where money is now is not the power anymore, but is in service of love itself. But how are we going to really learn to live as love on this planet if we want to try and do that as a concept, or we don't take our relationship with love fully into these beautiful human bodies of ours. And so for me, when I talk about making love to ourselves, it's not just something that's kind of a fun pastime or something that we hope will bring us a bit more ease and a bit more enjoyment in our lives. It's actually talking about a very key human drive, which is the knowing somewhere in us that we are love, and that we want to be loved, and that we want to love. But again, how are we going to be able to love others if we don't start by learning how to love ourselves? So I hope that sketches for you the kind of context within which I want to introduce you to these 3 principles of Tantric lovemaking. And maybe just to say a bit about my own reason for being interested in this topic. I had a period in my life where there was suddenly, after living in the wilderness for about a year and actually stepping out of society quite fully, I become quite a wild little creature there in the forest and in the desert, semi-desert area where I lived. In that time, I kind of dropped out of my familiar relationship with my body and with sexuality, and started to tune in much deeper to what I was experiencing. It was a very beautiful experience of listening to the elements, listening to the animals, listening to my own body. And when I came back into society after that experience, I found myself actually suddenly being extremely attractive to men and to women as well. And suddenly there was this explosion of sexual energy in my life. And in the process of that, I also got to realize that the way that I was relating to sexual energy was actually not in resonance or deeply attuned to what was happening in my inner life and my spiritual life, which through this year of being in the wilderness had dropped to a whole new level of depth and clarity. And so in my inquiry, I found my first spiritual tantric teacher, who, in teaching me about lovemaking, kept telling me to relax and to let go of all this performance that I had developed as a way of relating to sexuality. And initially I was really quite confused by this, because I thought that that's what it meant to make love. You have to perform, and I was very good at it. And so to be suddenly told that this is not what it's about, it was quite a shock to my system. It was like a little Zen blow that came along and brought me to a halt. But pretty soon I started to discover a very different way of relating to sexual energy, and got introduced to what I would now distill as these 3 key principles of tantric practice, which I want to introduce you to now. And so, talking about making love to ourselves the tantric way, let's have a look at these 3 key principles which you can remember and just come back to as you start to explore making love to yourself in a deeper way. And so the first principle that I want to look at is that if we start to develop a tactile relationship with our bodies, in other words, start to get interested in learning how to touch these bodies with awareness and with love, then through that we end up activating the sexual circuits, these subtle sexual circuits in our bodies that the Tantric masters have talked about and have discovered really through their own practice over the years. And in the process of developing this deep felt love relationship with our bodies, and really a tactile relationship, what happens miraculously, it seems like, but actually quite understandably, is that our shameful relationship with our sexual bodies starts to drop away, and we start to show up in a very a real way in our bodies. So I've just been told that my microphone isn't coming through clearly. Let me just check here. Okay. Great. Hopefully you're all hearing me well now. Okay, so let's continue. And I'm going to be introducing you to some practices as I go along. So first, let me just describe what I mean by activating the full sexual circuits of our sexual bodies. So there are different levels of our sexual body. One level that's important and valuable to be aware of is actually the biochemistry of our sexuality. So every cell in our body actually has receptors, cell receptors, and those receptors are meant to be available for neuropeptides to come and attach to them. And neuropeptides are kind of a chemical component in our biochemistry that creates the states that we live in. And they play a very key role in our sexuality. So one of those neurochemicals that's very important in lovemaking and also lovemaking with ourselves is a neuropeptide called oxytocin. And oxytocin is released when we are breastfeeding, actually, as women. And it's what creates that state of euphoria and that deep bonding with the baby. Oxytocin is also what gets released when we fall in love with somebody. And again, it creates that sense of bonding and that very blissful, ecstatic state. It's an interesting neuropeptide because it has a lasting quality. It actually doesn't just flip us into an experience and flip us out again. It actually starts to deepen the deeper we go in an experience of meeting the beloved, and the beloved can be ourselves in this case, with intimacy and with real presence. And so the practices I'm going to be introducing you to on this call build that quality of bond, of a love relationship, bonding experience with yourself, which is really interesting to realize that that is possible and that we can make love to ourselves in a way that we actually start to release oxytocin in our bodies. And so we don't, again, have to wait for a lover to come along for that experience to happen. So the element that brings the release of oxytocin in our bodies when we make love to ourselves is the element of touch. And touch that comes with consciousness and with awareness, and that comes with love, which is very different from the kind of sexual touch that is involved in traditional masturbation, we can say, where we are simply just wanting to quickly get to genital orgasm, but we're not really exploring intimacy with ourselves or developing a loving relationship with our bodies. So that's the first level of our sexual body that's important to know about, is the biochemical element. Then there's another element I'm going to be talking about on this call, which is our subtle sexual anatomy, or the subtle sexual body. It's not something that is very well known in the Western world, and I'm not so sure even in the Eastern world anymore these days, which is that inside these physical bodies of ours, there is a subtle structure that runs from the base of our bodies, that's called the perineum, a set of muscles between the anus and the genitals, and that runs all the way, the core of our bodies, all the way to the crown of our head, at the very top of the head. And it actually runs right in front of the spine and right into the earth beneath us, and opens up to the dimensions above us, the unseen realms above us, through the crown chakra. So chakra refers to an energy point along the central channel or meridian that is the core of a subtle sexual body. Sometimes that core is referred to as the Sushumna. That's the Sanskrit word for it, the word that's used in the the language that's used in many of the Tantric traditions, the old Tantric texts. But in the West, we often refer to it as the core light, because it's almost like a tube of fluorescent light. If you could see it with your inner eye, that's what it looks like in the core of the body. And along this core, there are energy points. For instance, the heart chakra. That is it's a point where a particular frequency of consciousness comes together and then expands out, radiates out from that point. The heart chakra being the frequency of love. And if we were to look, for instance, at the third eye, that is the frequency of deeper intuition and extrasensory perception that opens through that channel. So the fascinating thing is that when we start to connect to our sexual energy, right, so at the base of our bodies, if we start to connect to sexual energy and really open up to what is possible in it, we discover that sexual energy actually doesn't want to just stay in our genitals. So the conditioning that we're sitting with is that we kind of contract our sexual energy right into the genitals. And then we, through a lot of intense movement and friction, we push it out through the genitals. But what's possible is that if we start to relax and we open up the body, that the sexual energy actually starts to flow along the subtle sexual channel that runs, as I said, just in front of the spine and all the way up the body. And so there's an amazing experience that happens where the deeper dimensions of our being start to open up through our opening to the flow of sexual energy. And so this is also something that can happen in our self-loving, in our making love to ourselves, to our own sexual bodies. And I'll be unpacking more dimensions of this on the call. But in this first principle, really, we're talking about a tactile relationship with our body that activates the sexual circuits. And what we have to realize here is key is that the connection between the heart and the genitals, those two aspects or levels of our sexual energy, they form an electromagnetic circuit. So one could say that the heart is like the positive pole and the sexual organ is like the negative pole. If we try to make love or be sexual just from the genitals, what ends up happening is that we have a level of sexual experience that may be very pleasurable, but it doesn't actually connect up the full sexual circuitry that is in the sexual body. When we start by opening up our hearts and we connect to love, in this case for ourselves, and if we're making love to a partner, then that also will include our love for our partner. When we start from there and then connect to our sexual organs and we create the connection between the two, something entirely different starts to happen in the flow of sexual energy in our bodies. If we then include in that flow the connection between our hearts and our hands that are actually connected to the heart through our physical structure, then we can start to touch ourselves and make love to ourselves in our bodies through our skins in a way that not only opens up the heart more fully, but actually connects us into our sexual bodies and into our sexual experience. So you can try this with me now. So if we start by just taking a moment to really breathe into our hearts and give ourselves the space to drop into a deep, deep self-love. So to whatever degree that's possible for us right now, just the sense of like, hello, beloved. Oh, hello, beloved. Breathing into this love for ourselves. Yeah. And becoming still in it. Letting it really settle into our hearts. This deep self-love. And with every in-breath, more love coming into your heart. So that you start to not only fill up your heart, but also the rest of your body, everything getting filled up with this quality of love. And then you can start to also become aware of your genitals. And one way of doing that is by gently squeezing and releasing the muscles of your genitals at the base of your genitals. So just finding them and gently squeezing and releasing them. And you might notice that there's a very subtle, delicious sensation that comes in your body through this. At the same time, this beautiful opening in the heart. And then letting this energy that's building up in your heart, letting it now start to cascade over into your arms and down your arms and into your hands, so that the hands become filled with the love that is in your heart. And really putting the intention in your hands that you want to let them become the instruments of your heart. And then once that starts to happen, now you can start to touch yourself, and just beginning even with your hands, right? So touching your hands in a way that they communicate to each other. Beloved, I love you. I feel you. Right, and we can see if I can do this without bumping my mic. We can take this to the face, right, to really like touch ourselves. In a way that communicates love. You know, we have this amazing ability as human beings, because we are made of consciousness, that our intention and the consciousness that we put into anything, including touch, can actually open up possibilities of experience that we may not have thought as possible. And so, as you touch yourself in this way, and of course at the moment what I'm doing is I'm touching parts of my body that are not main erogenous zones. In other words, an erogenous zone is a place that is loaded with sexual energy. Our main erogenous zones are our genitals and also the nipples of the breasts. And the secondary erogenous zones would be places like the back of the earlobe, sometimes the inside of the arms, the inside of the thighs. We have to explore for ourselves which areas are very erotic for us. For instance, for me, like any touch on the inside of my feet is actually incredibly arousing. So we can start to take this quality of touch that we've now developed here in our hands, and we can take that from the parts of our bodies that are not main erogenous zones down into places that are more erotic, like for instance our breasts, right? And now start to touch the breasts in a way that we really breathe our love in. Like, oh, hello, beloved body. I love you. Letting the love sink in. Allowing movement, right? Allowing breath, allowing the flow that is going to be a fuller expression of this experience of embodied love that you're starting to feel as you just begin to make the connection between touch and love and erotic sexual energy. And you can take this kind of touch right down into your genitals as well. I'm just going to shift my computer a little bit further away from me so you can see more of my body. Give me a moment. All right, sitting a bit higher up. So that is the first principle I wanted to talk about. So what happens when we start to develop this kind of tactile relationship with our bodies where love is communicating through the touch? It replaces the shame that we've built up over years of making love to ourselves in a way that actually is not honoring because it's disconnected from the heart. So this is a key in terms of letting go of the shame and coming to a more profound and a deeper relationship with ourselves in our own delicious, beautiful sexual bodies. So moving on to the second principle that I wanted to speak about is simply the invitation to slow down, to dive deeper, and to start feeling more in your own sexual body. And I want to tell this beautiful story that illustrates what I mean by slowing down. It comes from the work of Daniel Odier in his book, Tantric Quest, An Encounter with Absolute Love. And he talks about, we don't know if it's a real meeting with a dakini or a mystical meeting. But a dakini, just by the way, is a woman in this case, who in the Tantric tradition of Tibet is seen as somebody who has been fully initiated into the wisdom tradition, the mystery wisdom tradition of sexuality. So she's an embodiment really of the feminine principle. And mostly in the Tibetan tradition, the dakini is a deity, so she's not embodied, but there are rare cases of women who actually were an embodiment in physical form of the dakini principle. So in this story, this man goes on a quest to find the dakini. And through long and arduous journeys, after about a year, many trials and tribulations, he meets the dakini. And he goes through certain tests and she accepts them. And as soon as he starts the training, she invites him, she puts him outside. He has to stay outside during the night in the Himalayas. And she gives him this massive pile of wood and tells him to keep himself warm during the night. And so what the man does is he builds a massive bonfire and is very warm extremely warm actually, for a short period of time. And then suddenly not warm at all anymore because he burnt up all the wood. And so the dakini finds him half frozen in the morning and she bursts out laughing. And then sits him down the next evening and shows him how to build a fire. And she takes just 3 pieces of wood and she builds a small fire. And they sit with this fire and go together in a deep meditation. And every now and again she puts another log onto the fire. And so she keeps these fires going. And by the morning, they're still warm. And she turns and she says to him, what do you want? Do you want one big bonfire that is going to give you a momentary experience of ecstasy and warmth and enjoyment? Or do you want to build a slow, deep, sustainable fire of sexual energy in your body? And this is exactly what we're talking about here. And again, I'm coming back to the power of intention. Unconsciously, most of us, when we're making love to ourselves, we are acting out an intention of actually burning up the wood. In other words, getting rid of the energy that's in our bodies by quickly building up to a genital orgasm through fast stimulation of the genitals and maybe using a lot of fantasy or images. And so we push ourselves to a high where we then suddenly release all that orgasmic energy and then we're tired and we fall asleep. So it's the end of the fire. But we can use our intention more consciously to actually build a much more deep and sustainable sensual and sexual experience in our bodies. But in order to build that, we have to be aware, again, that if we're going to be contracting into our genitals with fast rubbing sex with our own bodies that's driven by maybe a highly stimulating tool like a vibrator, or even using our own hands, but we're rough with it and we're going really fast and we're building up a lot of intensity quickly. What happens is that, again, in our biochemistry, we start to release a neuropeptide that's called dopamine. And dopamine is an interesting biochemical because it is interested in the chase. It builds up a lot of kind of ecstasy in our body through the wanting. And it actually is sometimes called the body's cocaine because it creates that kind of high. And the problem with it is that it creates a big high quickly. So, for instance, we build up that sexual energy through pushing in the genitals, and we rise in our to a sexual peak very quickly, and then it completely drops, and there's no more energy left. And this, of course, is not very sustainable. So, another way of looking at our sexual energy is to realize that these bodies of ours really are like the ocean, and that they have the possibility of moving like tidal waves. And so our bodies can move slow and deep like this. We can actually, just simply through our breath, start to slow down and deepen our sexual experience. So imagine you're making love to yourself, right? So you've now been touching your entire body, and your body just feels so open and loved, and you've gone into all the areas that feel particularly erotic to you, and right maybe into your genitals, right? And now you're touching your genitals in a way that you're bringing all that love and all that tenderness and care into your genitals. So if you're in a male body and you have a penis, imagine holding your scrotum and your penis in a way that you are taking great love and great care into the touch, with this awareness that your penis is actually a vehicle of consciousness. It has tremendous intelligence. And if you touch it in this way of being interested to discover, to connect with that consciousness, to connect with your penis with that kind of love, it's a very different experience of your sexuality that opens in your genitals. And the same for us as women, right? So because our genitals are internal, it sometimes is good to start outside. So to even just cup the vagina and the vulva and the labia like this and breathe into it. And then slowly we can start to make contact in a way that we really bring our love and our tenderness and our care into the inside folds of this beautiful flower that is our main sexual organ. And then, once we've made that contact, or maybe even before that, we can start to go into this deep, slow, rhythmic breathing. Right, so a very different way of breathing than our usual way, where we either not breathing really, we're kind of frozen in this building up of friction in the body, or we're breathing very fast like that, which does build up a certain level of sexual energy, but it's that bonfire kind of energy. If we want to build that, what I often call the liquid blue flame, that keeps going deeper and more sensual and more body, then what we want to do is we want to learn to get control over the speed at which we're moving our sexual energy. And what what starts to happen here is that as we slow down and we feel more and we connect more deeply in this way with our bodies, we start to make deeper inward contact with ourselves. So the intimacy that we experience in our lovemaking with ourselves becomes quite profound compared to just traditional masturbation. So the third principle that I want to speak about is how to utilize breath and spinal movement to become actually multi-orgasmic or full-body orgasmic in our sexuality. And I just want to qualify what I mean by multi-orgasmic and full-body orgasmic. I'm actually not somebody who is particularly interested in too much of a focus on orgasm itself, because we have such a misunderstanding in our world about what orgasm is. We think mostly that it's a very intense genital affair, and we don't realize that what the potential is a deep ecstatic awakening in every cell of our bodies that occurs when our sexual energy first of all relaxes out of this contraction that we're holding it in, because we're making contact with our bodies in this way of bringing love and bringing awareness. And then, just this deeper drop into the body that starts to happen, so that we start to basically open up to a flow of sexual energy that's not located only in the genitals, but that spreads throughout the whole subtle sexual circuitry that I spoke about on the beginning of the call. And so this movement of sexual energy starts to happen. There's a whole circulation of the energy. So instead of the orgasmic experience just in the genitals, now the entire body, starting in the center of the body, is getting the benefit of this awakened sexual energy, which is really actually vital life force. It's what animates all of life, all of existence. And so when this kind of sexual energy opens in us, we start to feel deeply connected and in communion, not only with ourselves, but actually with all of life, because we're making contact. Every cell in our body starts to open up and starts to sing inside in a way that we actually start to know in a felt sense that we one with the stars, that we one with the trees that are growing underneath our feet, that we one with the elements, that we one with the beloved, we one with our friends. There actually isn't a real separation between any of us. And so the texture of love as communion, as a flow between a parent self and a parent other, becomes the texture of our living. And lovemaking becomes something that is particularly maybe intense and focused in our self-loving practice, but then becomes something that flows over into all of our relating. So let me come back to how to utilize the breath and spinal movement to become multi-orgasmic and also to move the sexual energy throughout the body. First of all, we have to realize that the breath has an enormous impact on our nervous system. So when we use our breath in a way that we're unconscious, so we're holding our breath while we're kind of building up friction in the sexual body, what that's going to do is it's going to create a very erratic experience in the body. And that erratic experience is registered in the sympathetic nervous system, which is our fight and flight system. So that builds up a sexual experience in us, which is very hyper and very aroused in a kind of hard way. And it may definitely build us up to a peak of sexual experience, which is pleasurable for typically 45 seconds. That there's a drop and we actually may experience even a dump in our energy or depression. Whereas if we start to breathe in the slow, deep, delicious way where we let the sound also be there in the breath. So Oh, right, sighing out the breath. Mm. Slow, deep, rhythmical breathing in our lovemaking starts to activate the parasympathetic nervous system, which is our release and relaxation aspect of the nervous system. Interestingly enough, especially when we want to activate sensuality in the body and the feeling of pleasure felt throughout the entire body and particularly also on the skin, it's the parasympathetic nervous system that opens up the body to be receptive and to be available to that full, deep, delicious, orgasmic flow of sexual energy that wants to ripple throughout the entire body. Then the next point is here that most of us are not aware of the impact of our spines in distributing sexual energy. The spine is actually a sexual highway. So if we look at the sacrum, which is really at the base of the spine, a big triangular bones, and maybe put your hands on the sacrum there so that you can feel it for yourself. If you put your hands at the sacrum and you start to rock your pelvis backwards and forwards, so there's a movement in the spine that starts to happen, forward and backwards rocking. And you can feel it in your hand as you move your pelvis. Right, so what this movement is going to do is it's going to start to open up your spine. And this kind of movement starts to happen. An unwinding of the spine. And it may move like this backwards and forwards. So now imagine you're lying back, right? You might be lying on your back and you're making love to yourself. You're touching your entire body. You're bringing the sexual energy into your genitals, and you're touching your genitals, and you're in your slow, deep breathing. Beautiful, delicious, slow, deep breathing. And now you're also bringing your spine in. And what the spine is doing is at the sacrum, that backwards and forward of the sacrum is, in the Tantric understanding, is called the sacral pump. So it actually pumps the sexual energy up your spine. And now your spine is starting to open up. And as it, for instance, as it opens up here in the heart area, now the sexual energy that's generated in the genitals comes all the way into the heart. And it creates this experience of really a heart orgasm. So a very ecstatic experience of the heart opening up. And as it opens up, there's a sense of being in this deep love communion with all of life. And the sexual energy really catapulting itself into an experience of unconditional love, deeply felt inside the body. And so this movement of the spine opening up is also a very beautiful way to start to activate the flow of sexual energy. It's important to remember, first of all, to relax, to allow yourself to open up and feel maybe sensations that are more subtle than what you're used to, right? Because most of us are used to orgasmic experience that is triggered by fast, intense arousal with friction in the genitals. So this is a different quality of sensation that you're going to open to. Be curious about the mystery and allow yourself to enjoy. Right, so to keep going back into the body, into the sensations in the body, and not to drift off into thinking. We have to develop that practice to come back to sensations, whatever is felt in the body, to be curious in the discovery. Because, of course, also when we start to experience pleasurable sensations in our sexual body, that also may open up other emotions, other states that also need to be felt as part of the experience of really opening up fully to our sexual bodies. Right, beloved. So at this point, I think what I'd like to do is to just introduce you to my free video series that I've developed, and I actually made one for men and one for women. And you can find it on my site that is called, so if you go to Shakti Malan, that's my name and my surname, SHAKTIMALAN.thinkific.com, and that's spelled THINK, Thinkific, so THINKIFIC.com /. So if you go to shaktimalan.thinkific.com, you will find there the free video series that I've developed, and there's one for men and there's one for women. So go ahead and enjoy that. Then there's also a beautiful guided meditation that I have developed that I call, I forget what I call it now, just looking for it there. Being your own best lover. So it's a downloadable body meditation in which I guide you through the practice of connecting with your sexual body in the way that I demonstrated now, and I include many of the principles that I've been talking about here. And I think Tiffany is going to just post for you in the chat box the link to the different sites. Okay, that's beautiful. So you've got the link there to that downloadable audio meditation. It costs, I think, $5. Right. And then now, very excited to let you know about this entire little course that Tiffany and I have been developing. That is, let me just find the link to that. So Tiffany, if you can just put for us the link in to Sexual Self-Loving the Tantric Way. So all the principles that I've been talking about here, you can find in this course that we've developed. So you might want to just click on that link as I talk about it, because I'm going to quickly just introduce you to some of the key principles here in this course. And as you can see there, it's an audio and video series. And what I've done is I've taken a number of the key practices that I've been using myself and that I've been teaching across the world, and I've put them into video format so that you can see exactly what it is that I'm doing, and also put them into audio format so that you can actually download the videos and the audios, of course, and the audios are meant for you to listen to while you're doing the practices. They're beautifully done with music in the background, many of them, so that it really creates the mood and gives you the structure in order to practice these different techniques which I have included in this course. So what it also gives you, apart from the audios and the videos, is access to an exclusive website where you'll be able to download all the materials, and then also be able to ask me questions about what you're experiencing. It works really beautifully. It's very accessible, and amazing how quickly, in my experience working with people with this material across the world, people start to drop into an entirely different state in their relationship with their bodies on all levels, and particularly in relationship with their own sexual bodies when they start to do these practices. And there are 4 different categories in what I introduce on that course. The first is practices for activating sexual energy. Interestingly, most of us are not aware of the fact that we don't have to have a lover or a dildo or a fantasy in order to activate our sexual energy. There are other channels which are deeply connected to this full body flow of sexual energy. And the practices that I give there are very accessible, simple tools for connecting with these different flows. For instance, an example is, did you know that the earth underneath us is actually a massive electromagnetic field that we can open to, and through our feet, when we move in a certain way, or actually relax onto the earth in a certain way, we can start to receive that energy, actually sexual energy, and receive it into our body in a way that it then activates the electrical flow of our sexual energy, and it creates a kind of like a ripple, like a shaking, rippling flow of energy. And that what just happened in my body there happened now just because I, through my intention, opened up to that flow in the body. So beautiful, just bursting to she feels it. So this access to tantric practice for activating the flow of sexual energy in your body in and don't require a dildo. And you can bring that into your lovemaking with somebody else as well. Then I've got practices that introduce you to how to open up this body of yours to deep sensual flow. And the practices, many of them are taking you into your liquid body. So I just love these comments that are coming in, so beautiful. So, even just lying on the ground and starting to move your body in ways that open up this deep oceanic quality that's in our bodies. We have access to such a deep sensual flow because our bodies are actually 70% water, but we don't somehow think of it. We don't relate to our bodies in this way where we open up to a deep sensual flow. So I'm giving you a number of practices there that will open you to that flow. And by the way, some of these practices are actually going to take you right into your limbic brain, which is that part of your unconscious sexuality that is deeply instinctual and actually quite animal, and gives us access to an enormous amount of untapped energy that we can start to activate simply through certain kind of movements and sounds that then bring through our bodies this suppressed and very vital aspect of our sexual energy. And the third category of what I've got in these practices is these different sexual flows. So I've introduced you to them to a small degree, but I'll be giving you practices in this course that take you through these different sexual flows and give you very specific ways of working with opening up, for instance, the chakras, so that you can start to take sexual energy up the body, and it starts to go higher and higher up through the body. And then the final section is working with the specific flows that are unique to those of us who are in a male body and those of us who are in a female body, because our sexual energy actually doesn't flow in exactly the same way in a male and a female body. So again, just inviting you. Actually, we've got at the moment, we've got this entire product available for a very special price of $59 only. And I think that's really a steal, because it's an enormous amount of information that's given to you in a very accessible way. It's really all that you need in order to start to change your relationship with your own sexual body in a very deeply felt and ecstatic way. Ecstatic not only in the sense of a kind of pleasure that has an opposite, right? But also ecstatic in the sense of making contact with your essence, with the essence of who you are, with your own divinity, with the unique qualities of your being as an embodiment of that divinity, all the way into the specifics of this incredible vessel, this body that you're being given, and discovering that body through your sexuality. Okay, beautiful people. So we've come to the end of the hour, and I'd love to maybe just give you an opportunity to type in any questions, observations in the text box, and we can go a little bit over the time, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. And yeah, beautiful comments. Looks like you enjoyed that. So, Neha saying, Shakti, you're amazing. I found you quite accidentally and look forward to hopefully meeting you again one day. Just this time with you today is so supportive to feel connected to my body and sexual power or flow without shame, guilt. Thank you. With much love always. Oh, beautiful. Thank you so much. Ooh, invitations to go travel. Okay, beautiful beloveds. Well, so beautiful to get your comments coming in here. Let me just see if I can answer one or two questions. I'm having sexual blockages issues, and that's having an impact on my relationship. Will these exercises help? Definitely they will help, because they will bring you into a relationship with your own sexual body where you can start to slow down what usually is happening too fast, right, beloved? So oftentimes when we're actually in the act of lovemaking, everything is happening so fast and we've got so much pressure to perform that we actually can't feel what's going on in our bodies. And so especially if there's been some trauma in our sexual experience, we tend to immediately go into sympathetic nervous system mode, which is the fight and flight response, and everything is happening too fast. So what these practices do, it teaches us to slow down our experience in our body and start to meet what we're feeling there, what we're experiencing there, in a way that is slow enough that the parasympathetic nervous system can also start to come in, which is actually the part of our nervous system that starts to release what is held as trauma in our bodies. And it also gives us the opportunity to then consciously meet what we feel in our body so that we can experience that without any pressure. And that is really the key process that I use whenever I work with anybody that's got trauma in their bodies. So I think that answers a few questions that are coming up. What would you suggest about starting these practices living in a house where my family are very closed down to this practice? Well, Flo, I would say, you can do it very much in the privacy of your own room. It doesn't require you to make any sounds that are maybe distasteful to your family or may upset them. There are practices that involve sound, but if you can't make the sound, you can do the sound internally, right? And you can still do the practices without making the sound, or even making the sound very quietly. And I think what might happen is that it will create such a beautiful field of peace and ease in your own space that you might find that your family starts to relate to you differently, because you will start to relate to them differently. Beautiful. Let me just see if I can answer another question here. Andy's saying, hello from London. I resonate with everything that you've introduced here. You've talked a lot about the quality of love, but what about the quality of desire? Andrew, thank you for that question. And what I'm assuming is that the quality of desire is something that we have access to when we are with somebody that is desire. So desire is something which I don't feel that I can really manufacture, in your life. Or I can't give you practices for developing desire, because desire is something that is a response to what is happening for you. So when you meet somebody where there's an attraction, then there is desire that happens. In relation to your own body, what I'm hoping you might experience is that when you bring awareness and love to your touching of yourself, also in your sexual organs, that your sexual organs will respond in a way that actually opens up a different flow of desire that is, I experience this in my body, is the flow of desire which responds to the movement of truth, the movement of presence, the movement of love meeting the body. And if you find that when you do these practices and you don't get aroused in the way that you are used to, then I would say don't be too concerned about that, because you can then always take what you're learning through these practices into making love to yourself in a way that does bring arousal, right? So whatever it is that you're used to, or that in your experience brings arousal to you, or into your love making with another. When you practice these practices, they will change your love making, and let the arousal and the quality of desire come in whatever way that comes in your life. That is your affair, and for you to just then bring what you learn through these practices into the sexual experience where there is desire and arousal. But always to look for that connection between arousal and the heart, so that it's not disconnected from the heart. So let me see Valentia's question. Do you have courses or work on the inner sacred marriage of integration of one's inner masculine and feminine? Absolutely, Valentia. I developed a course that's called The Soulmate Within. And it is actually a course that I ran this year. It is a very beautiful, powerful course. And we will be running it again next year. And we'll look into making it available as a standalone product. Many of the techniques and the practices that I spoke about in this call, and that is in the series that I've just introduced, actually do activate this connection between masculine and beautifully. So you might find that because they work with feminine and masculine flows. Beautiful. Let me see if there are any other questions. Did you say that doing the individual practices can support or be helpful for couples when they come together? Yes, indeed. It is extremely helpful for both partners to be doing these practices. And of course, you can do them together. You can be doing your solo practice together. It's actually a very sexy thing to do. Because you're opening up your own sexual energy and you're seeing your partner do that, and then you come together in this beautiful, deep flow of lovemaking that has so much more presence in the body. Okay, beloveds. Well, it looks like this is it. These are your questions. Let me just see here. The flows. Another question. What would you suggest about starting these practices? Oh, no, I've already answered that one. Okay, people. Well, it looks like the rest of your comments are basically just appreciation. It's such a pleasure. I feel so grateful and delighted that it's possible to show up across the world through this technology that's available to us these days. And I will, in the year to come, be doing much more free calls like this, and be making available more free audios and videos. So look out for that. And I feel deeply nourished and delighted by the exchange that has happened through my sharing and through your receiving what I offered you here today. And just a reminder again to go and have a look on the link. Tiffany, if you can just post it again in the post box there. Go and have a look at the product. It's really not very expensive at all, and it will give you the access to really, I would say, quite a strong transmission of Tantric practice, which I've developed over the years and which I've, of course, received through the masters. And it's simple, it's accessible, and it's felt in your body as a new relationship with your own body and with your own sexuality, which you can then bring to others. Okay, beloveds, deep bow to you all, sending you my love and your discovery. May it be blessed and may it be enjoyable. So much love and goodbye for now.